The vice president and the president were informed about the nature of this pandemic. They knew what was happening, and they didn't tell you.
When I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism.
You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage
Which we've
to be a
always
leader,
done.
speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves.
The reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. The fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable.
That was the two vice presidential candidates last night mixing it up on the coronavirus in a very different debate than we saw last week between the candidates for president. But in the end, let's be frank, we all want to know who won. And for a preliminary reading, there is no one better to ask that question of than Frank Luntz, who specializes in real-time focus groups for debates just like these. And he's back with us now for what he learned last night. Frank, thank you so much for being here. So you have some results, as I understand it, and frankly, they were a little surprising to me.
Well, let's compare the second debate with the first debate, when everybody felt that the American people lost. Donald Trump lost the most, but neither presidential candidate lived up to what we would have hoped for in this discussion. Turning to the vice presidential debate, if it was about the language used or the issues taken, that both candidates, the evaluation from our undecided participants from undecided states, was that they both did pretty well. They both articulated their positions effectively. But what was the tiebreaker to them is how they performed as people, how they presented themselves, whether they were presidential or not. And on that, it was almost unanimously they chose Mike Pence. They watched the facial expressions, the reactions by the California senator, and they compared that to the occasionally tired-looking vice president, but capable and unflappable. And they thought that Senator Harris tried to get under his skin and that she failed. And they thought that he held his own when she came after him. And so that's why they felt that in terms of who won the debate, they would say Mike Pence overwhelmingly. And I think you'll find that in the surveys, just as they felt that Joe Biden won the first debate for some of the same reasons.
Right.
That in the first debate, it was Trump's behavior that the public reacted so negatively to. In the second debate, in the vice presidential debate, it was Senator Harris's behavior that our undecided voters reacted so negatively to.
Well, I find that fascinating, Frank. Did they react at all to the fact that, as I observed it at least, I thought that the Vice President Pence, went over time a fair amount, talked over the moderator, would interrupt, things like that. Did they react to that at all? They didn't find that amiss?
Yes, they did. Good for you. And one of the things that, last
Frank?
Because the public does respond to that. They expect a presidential candidate or vice presidential candidate to play by the rules, to stick to the time allotted and not to go over again and again. That was bad. But the expressions and the what I call harumphing was even worse. And all I need to do, David, is take you back to the Gore-Bush debates of 2000. Remember the sighing and the moaning and the complaining of Al Gore during the debate? How that really affected people negatively? It's the same thing now. It's 20 years later, and they still feel that way. There's a certain decorum that you expect from your candidates, and she did not live up to it. He was not perfect, but she did not live up to it.
It's fascinating. So now the news today is it doesn't look like we're going to have a debate as we were planned to on the 15th. That's next week. As the commission said it should be virtual, President Trump said he won't do that. So what is the consequence if we don't have a debate or two here? Who does that help or hurt?
So let's make some news right now. I don't see how Donald Trump catches Joe Biden without having two debates. He is far enough behind in enough states that he will need two direct encounters to compare his vision to the vice president's vision, to compare Trump's policies to Biden's policies. And without that debate, I can't do the math to take him to where he needs to be if he expects to win this election. I think it was a very unwise decision. I am honestly, privately, expecting him to reverse that decision as he himself does the math, that he's trying to pressure the debate commission, which will not be pressured. I know them. These are very decent, very committed to the democratic process. I think Trump, if he follows through with this, is just determine who wins the election in 2020.
Finally, quickly, Frank, are there enough undecided voters left to make a difference?
That's the whole point. Even in my group, there were several people that I wish had not participated because, I mean, you start to ask them questions, they're truly undecided. And by the way, the published polls have it at 10%. My polling has it at 6%. What I truly believe, it represents 3% of America, and that is not enough without a couple more debates for Trump to close the gap.